For listeners who don't normally hear me in the morning, it's that time again where we take a look at some of the skills, the traditions, the habits, the cultures of yesteryear, those basic things that were often passed on from generation to generation that made life richer, calmer, perhaps more fun and more practical. The skills that maybe aren't taught anymore, we don't pick them up for some reason. It's all about teaching young pups old dog tricks. And today it's how to have a good fight. And I'm not talking about boxing or kickboxing or UFC or anything like that. It's about how to have a good fight, a good disagreement verbally. And to walk me through it, I'm joined by Dr. Rachel Hannam. Rachel Hannam is Director of North Brisbane Psychologists. Rachel, thanks for coming in.
No worries. Thanks, Steve.
Is there anything wrong with having a fight or an argument or a disagreement?
Not in principle if you do it well, which is what we're here to talk about, right? Having an argument or a fight where you are contemptuous and demeaning towards the other person will cause damage. So it's very important that we know how to fight well.
Well, I'm glad you're here. What's the difference between a difficult conversation, an argument, a discussion, and a fight?
Okay, so a difficult conversation or a difficult discussion we may call difficult because we feel a lot of feelings while we're in it. You know, we may feel everything from concern to anxiety to defensiveness to anger. And if we can manage those inner experiences, those feelings through the discussion, then it won't turn into an argument or a fight. I'm reminded of the John Cleese skit. You can look it up on YouTube. It's called The Argument Clinic, where people pay to have an argument. And it really turns into, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. And I show it to couples sometimes in my therapy clinic. It's only a couple of minutes on YouTube because I'm like, you guys sound like you're in the argument clinic. It's completely futile.
And do they get it when you show it to them?
Well, it lightens it up. It's
right.
Funny. I don't want to shame anybody
Yep.
for their ineffective communication strategies because we all resort to really ineffective, tragic communication strategies when we're emotionally flooded, but I want them to see the futility of, yes, you did, no, I didn't, yes, you did, kind of arguments. So arguments can be futile, as can fights. But I mean, fight is maybe they can be constructive if what we're doing is taking responsibility for our feelings and our needs. And that can look like a whole bunch of ways we can do that. But, I often say to my couples, I had a couple in my office yesterday, and I said, would you be okay if he just said, I'm really peeved off with you right now? I might not have used that word. I'm really angry, rather than calling you, I don't know, an idiot or something. And she said, that would be so much better if he just said, I'm furious right now, rather than calling her names, because that's him naming his feelings rather than giving her a label. So you could still be arguing, but it's so dependent on your mindset and attitude when you're arguing.
So human beings, we're emotional creatures.
We're emotional before we are verbal and intellectual.
Are we really?
Well, I think we're feeling creatures who think, not thinking creatures who feel.
See, I blame Freud for this because he made people feel emotions seem irrational, hysteria, what have you. And I won't go into a discussion about Freud, but a lot of people feel guilt about emotions. And I know a lot of blokes feel guilt when they feel anger.
Yeah.
And I once had a psych, one of your profession, tell me a few years back, hang on, there's nothing wrong or immoral about feeling angry.
Of course.
Depending on what you do with it.
Yes.
Where you direct it, how you, what you do with it after that point.
Absolutely.
Feeling angry is a perfectly logical or rational response to some sort of event.
All emotions, fear, sadness, anger. I often ask clients, how were those emotions dealt with in your family of origin? And we call this meta-emotions, which is feelings we have about feelings. So like you say, we can feel shame or guilt for having anger or shame or guilt for having fear. And we might have got that message from our parents, you know, don't cry or don't be a sissy or don't be scared. So that really changes how we relate to our own feelings and then in relationships deal with those feelings. But you're absolutely right. The full range of human emotions, they're all valid, they're all legitimate. It just depends how we handle them.
And my guest, Dr. Rachel Hannam, is here to help you maybe come up with some ideas about how to handle them. In other words, how to have a good disagreement, but not damage the other person and yourself, perhaps not bad behaviour. She's director of the North Brisbane Psychologists. Would you be more concerned about a couple who has regular arguments or a couple who never, ever argues?
Potentially both.
Mm-hmm.
Because if if couples are volatile and fighting all the time and doing that damage that you spoke about, where they're using what we call contempt, which is the opposite of respect. So it could be body language, eye rolling, sighing, implying you're such an idiot, or using names, put downs. That's damaging. But couples who never argue are potentially sweeping all of their important issues and feelings under the rug, and that is equally damaging for a relationship in the long run. So we've got to find that middle ground of how can we have difficult conversations and fight well.
Let's start looking at having a difficult conversation. So I'll use me as an example. I'll be the patsy. So my bride once said to me, "When you're at home, you're never at home." What's she saying to me?
Well, she's saying she has a need for presence, to be present with you, have you be present so you can be connected. I think it's a need for connection.
And when she said that, I realised what she meant by when she said something else, "You're not a good listener," which was a shock for a journo or a radio presenter, but you've got to be a really good listener. And so in trying to adjust, I've actually found that quite difficult. To say, focus on what's being said. Don't be distracted. Focus.
Yeah.
Someone's talking to you.
Yeah.
They want to be heard.
And I want to tell you, most couples struggle with that in the day of in these days of smartphones more than ever.
Yeah.
Although we've always struggled with this, let's be honest, as human beings. We all want to feel heard and understood.
Why is it so important for anyone, irrespective of their right or wrong, why is it so important to feel heard or listened to?
Well, it goes back to our primary attachment relationship with our parents. If we didn't feel seen and heard and understood by our parents, we didn't get our basic needs met. The mother looks at the baby to try and listens to the different cries to try and figure out, is this person cold, hungry, tired, or something else? So when we are seen and heard, we feel safe. And when we're not, we can feel lonely and anxious.
So we want to listen. We want to be heard. Because something is troubling us or something is on our mind, we want to speak to the other person about it.
Yeah.
How do you raise it? If someone has upset me or something has gone wrong and it's bugging me, how do you raise it? What's a good way to start that ball roll?
Okay, well, in one of the therapies I use, which is called the Gottman method, which is renowned around the world, they talk about the soft startup. So if I was your wife, I might come to you and say, "Hey, darling, there's something really important to me that I want to talk to you about."
And I'd be on my phone going, "Sure, I'll talk to you in a minute. Yeah, go for your life." "Well, what is it, honey? What's the problem?"
Yeah. So,
tick, 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 tick.
Yeah, well, okay, good. Thank you for being honest. Honesty is important too in this topic. You want to set up you don't want to just go in hard and go, "Oh, look, you're on your phone again. You never listen to me." That's not going to work. That's called a harsh startup. So a soft startup is a bit like a pre-frame. We want to set up the conversation because it matters to us. We want to respect ourselves by setting it up properly. So you might say, "Please, could you put your phone down? Have you got 5 minutes? This is really important to me. Is this an okay time to talk? I really want your full attention." So you've set it up. And then you might say, "Look, I'm nervous to raise this because I know I've raised it before, but it's an ongoing issue. And because I love you, I want us to talk about this. And I need you to take it seriously because it matters a lot to me," so that you put the emotion in it, but you set it up and you are soft in your approach, not harsh. And then you can go from there. It usually works a whole lot better if you're vulnerable and honest about that than the other person's more likely to be open and vulnerable too.
I once told my bride that when she uses those 5 words, "Darling, we need to talk," it's terrifying. So now she says, "Darling, we need to talk," knowing it's become a joke in the relationship.
Good.
It's a way of catching attention.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think that humour is so important in long-term relationships. If you can't make jokes out of these things, and you can't lighten it up, then it gets heavy. People get defensive. So that's good.
So I'm hearing you. You've said, "Darling, we need to talk." You want to raise something. And when you start telling me something, the recipient, male or female, starts to feel emotions rising. Defensiveness.
Yeah.
So what happens? What's going on?
We all get defensive. So if you're expecting a lot of defensiveness, then preempt it. Say, I know you'll probably feel defensive, but please try not to get defensive.
Don't yell at me in response.
Yeah. Please try and, take some deep breaths. Let's try and talk about this calmly. I don't want you to take this as criticism or as judgment, because the reason we get defensive, and this is in the Gottman method, we get defensive because we feel criticized, and nobody really likes to feel criticized. So it's so helpful to say, I'm really not trying to criticize you here. I'm trying to express my needs. See the difference?
And so how do I respond? Because a very mature woman once told me that often women in a relationship, they just want to be listened to, whereas men often try and solve the problem, fix it.
Yeah.
And that's when a man is apparently making a mistake.
So try and see that sometimes as a defence in itself. Okay, I'll fix it. I'll do this. Or sometimes you throw your hands up and say, I could never do anything right. I can't fix it, right? Both ways it can be a defence against vulnerability. It's a very vulnerable thing to do, to just sit and listen and say, tell me how you feel. Tell me what doesn't work for you. Tell me what's bugging you. Tell me what you need. And I will just hold space for you to do that. And bite your tongue and breathe through the defensiveness, which includes the desire to fix it. You may come up with a solution if you listen long enough, and it may arise organically, the solution, out of the listening and the feeling heard. And, it may just appear kind of by itself. But when you try to force a solution in a relationship, that usually doesn't work.
So almost the process of keeping a lid on your emotions somewhat, or keeping them in control, and just listening is almost like it's 90% of the thing done, in a sense.
I say that to couples. 80% of the battle won is just listening, reflecting, saying, that makes sense to me. I'm hearing you. I get it. Like, even that can make a huge difference. Yeah.
I'm surprised a lot of people have been growing up in family environments that have been quite tough, quite traumatic.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of shouting and yelling.
Yeah.
And the problem is what they've seen, they're modelling later on in life in their own relationship. How does someone get out of that automatic programming, if you like?
It is automatic program. It's our conditioning. That's the term we use. And it's profound conditioning because it goes way back to the start of our lives. And I encourage couples, first of all, I normalise it because what you said is absolutely right. This is so common. This is almost everybody to some degree. Very rare to find someone who goes, oh, no, I grew up in a very calm, warm, loving environment where conflict was dealt with really effectively. It's like, wow.
I actually did have that while my parents were married.
Yeah.
They were very calm.
Oh, very calm and warm and affectionate?
My dad could have been more so, I think.
Okay,
anyhow,
right. So, no one's perfect.
Yeah, there you go.
And we have to hold in one hand that our parents did their best and loved us and were
did their best.
Incompetent in some ways.
They had a go.
But also hold in the other hand that, their parenting had an effect on us and it's still affecting us in our relationship. So one part of it is learning new skills. The Gottman method is a very skills-based therapy. And if we can, and I say to people, it's not a character deficit, it's a skills deficit. So I can help you learn skills to communicate better. Really. I mean, we learn all sorts of other skills. Why would we not want to get good at these skills? That's part of it. And another part might be doing some deeper work on our own attachment styles, which come through from childhood, to heal some of those wounds. So there's sort of current here and now work, and sometimes there's work looking at our past, making sense of our life. So, and it takes longer than people would like, but it's worth it.
I like the idea of when you often mirror the other person's emotions. In other words, if someone says, you can see someone's angry and they're talking to, say, I see you're angry. So what do you do then? Like you mirror them.
Well, you have to remember there's something underneath the anger. There's always unmet needs under anger. And usually there's another emotion under anger, like hurt or disappointment or fear. So if you keep that in mind, the person may, because you can't stay angry forever. So at some point, if you can relax as much as you can, the person will run out of steam. And then you can say, was that hurtful? Was that disappointing? Are you scared? And they may be able to say, well, yeah. And then you can figure out, well, why? Why were you hurt or disappointed? Did you need some support or some acknowledgement or, something else and you didn't get it?
So what I'm taking away from this discussion is something that Linda's picked up on. She says, I think the reason people have disagreements is because they're not listening. In other words, just that somehow, focusing on the ability to listen to the other person, whether or not they're being reasonable or rational.
Yes.
Just start with listening.
Sue Johnson, who developed emotion-focused couples therapy, she says, we're not really fighting about the thing we're fighting about. We're fighting about how we feel we're being treated by the other person, which a big part of that is, not feeling heard, not feeling respected for our valid subjective experience. And this is a thing to remember that's so helpful. My experience is valid to me and yours is valid to you, and they're just different. And if we can take turns crossing over to each other's islands, it's like I'll go to your island, hang out there for a while, then you'll come to my island and hang out there for a while. They look different, but one's not better or worse or right or wrong or good or bad. They're just different. And at some point, that kind of empathy and listening each person relaxes, and when they relax, they can problem solve.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Steve.
Dr. Rachel Hannam, Director of North Brisbane Psychologists.
In your streets and in your city.
Small business is shrinking. Where are the jobs and how's it changing?
If it's happening in Brisbane.
Problem helping fuel the housing crisis in southeast Queensland.
It's on 612 ABC Radio Brisbane.